The notification lit up at 11:42 p.m. A single buzz on a phone that handled billion-dollar transfers and execution orders, but never this. Never a message from a contact saved simply as unknown child. Please help my mom. Hale Crowe read it twice. A wrong number. A prank. Some amateur's clumsy attempt at manipulation. He started to swipe it away when the screen flickered again. I'm in the closet. There's a bad man downstairs. His thumb hovered over the delete button. The whiskey in his other hand suddenly felt too heavy. He'd orchestrated violence that made headlines. He'd watched men beg, but he had never seen this. A 6-year-old's terror condensed into 18 words, sent to a stranger because there was no one else. He typed 3 words. Where are you? The response was immediate. An address. Then, please come fast. His lieutenant looked up as Hale stood, the chair scraping against marble. Boss, the Busan call is in 10. Hale was already at the door, his tailored jacket forgotten on the chair. Crowe, where the hell? He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because somewhere in those shaking texts was an echo he'd spent 20 years trying to silence. A child's voice in Seoul, begging someone, anyone, to stop what was happening in the next room. His Maserati screamed through empty streets. Red lights became suggestions. The GPS counted down for minutes. 3 minutes. Another buzz. I hear footsteps. Hale's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. His breath came faster. The city blurred into streaks of neon and shadow. One more message appeared as he turned onto a street. He found me. By the time he killed the engine in front of the darkened house, Hale understood with perfect clarity. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as the dragon of Seoul's underworld. He was arriving as the only thing standing between a child named Evie and the monster he'd once failed to stop. And what he discovered inside that living room, blood on unicorn pajamas, a mother's broken breathing, and eyes that still held hope, would crack open the vault he'd sealed around his heart. Stay with me, because what happens when a man built on violence finally learns to protect instead of destroy will prove that even the coldest empire can burn for the right reason. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. They called him the dragon, and in Seoul's underworld, that wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. Hale Crowe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he entered a room, conversations died mid-sentence. When he made a decision, it became law. When he wanted someone gone, they simply disappeared professionally and permanently, like smoke erased by wind. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Gangnam Tower, all glass and steel, and views that made visitors forget to breathe. Below him, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, millions of lives moving through their small dramas, while he orchestrated the larger ones. The stock market, the ports, the politicians who smiled for cameras while depositing his money into offshore accounts. He owned pieces of everything and cared about none of it. Tonight, like most nights, he sat alone in his office, a cathedral of dark wood and leather that smelled like expensive cigars and older secrets. His suit was Brioni, his watch was Patek Philippe, his whiskey was older than most of his employees. Everything around him screamed power, and everything inside him was silent. The Busan shipment cleared customs. His lieutenant reported from the doorway, knowing better than to enter uninvited. The Russians confirmed the meet for Thursday, and the prosecutor's daughter enrolled at Oxford, just like you suggested. Hale nodded once. The prosecutor would vote their way now. They always did when their children's futures hung in the balance. Anything else, boss? No. The lieutenant hesitated. You should eat something. It's been... I said no. The door closed with a whisper. Hale returned to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. 38 years old, 80 billion won in assets, 7 legitimate corporations, and twice as many underground operations. A network that stretched from Seoul to Singapore to San Francisco. And absolutely nothing that made him feel alive. He'd killed that part of himself deliberately, surgically, the same night he'd failed to save the people who mattered. Emotions were weaknesses. Attachments were liabilities. Love was a blade people used to cut you open from the inside. So he'd build an empire on ice instead. Efficient, ruthless, untouchable. His phone sat on the desk, dark and silent. It would ring soon with another crisis, another opportunity, another problem that required his particular brand of cold calculation. Men feared him. Women wanted to conquer him. Rivals studied him like a textbook on survival. None of them knew he was already dead inside. The whiskey tasted like nothing. The view looked like nothing. The life he'd constructed, brick by careful brick, felt like nothing. Hale Crowe ruled the underworld of Seoul with an iron fist wrapped in silk, and he would have traded it all for the ability to feel something, anything again. He just didn't know it yet. Then his phone buzzed. 11:42 p.m. And everything shattered. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. No country code, just a local mobile. Hale's first instinct was to ignore it. His personal number was encrypted, cycled monthly, known only to his inner circle. If someone had acquired it, they'd made a very expensive mistake. But something made him look. Please help my mom. He stared at the words. 5 of them, typed with the desperate speed of someone who didn't have time for punctuation or explanation. The grammar was simple, almost childlike. Hale's thumb moved to delete it. This was obviously a scam, some new social engineering attempt. They were getting creative now, using sympathy as a weapon. He'd seen it before, the sick grandmother, the stranded traveler, the orphaned refugee. Pull the heartstrings, empty the bank account. Except his bank accounts weren't accessible through sympathy. He set the phone down and reached for his whiskey. Outside, Seoul continued its endless dance of light and commerce. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Normal night. Normal life. Nothing that concerned him. The phone buzzed again. I'm in the closet. There's a bad man downstairs. Hale's hand stopped halfway to his glass. A bad man. Not intruder or burglar. The language was wrong. Too simple. Too honest. The kind of word a child would use when they didn't know the proper terms for violence. Only its shape and sound. He picked up the phone again, studying the message. No demands. No link to click. No bank details. Just terror, condensed and crystallized into 2 short sentences. His analytical mind began running probabilities. Wrong number? Possible. Sophisticated trap? Less likely. Anyone targeting him would know he didn't respond to emotional manipulation. Genuine emergency? The odds were astronomically low that a random child would accidentally text one of the most dangerous men in Seoul. But not impossible. He typed, "Who is this?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, whoever was typing fast, then stopping, then typing again. The message that finally came through made something cold slide down his spine. Evie, I am Schuster. I tried to text my uncle, but I got the numbers wrong, and my mom is screaming, please, please, please. 6 years old. The phone felt suddenly heavier in his hand. Hale had orchestrated kidnappings. He'd ordered hits on people with families. He'd built his empire on the understanding that everyone was expendable if the price was right. But he'd never had a 6-year-old beg him for help. Another message. Are you coming? He's hurting her really bad. Hale's jaw tightened. This had to be fake. It had to be. Children didn't accidentally text mafia bosses. The universe wasn't that cruel or that ironic. He started to type, "You have the wrong number," when his screen lit up one more time. I am scared. 2 words. Just 2. And somewhere beneath the ice he'd spent 20 years building, something cracked. I am scared. The words blurred on the screen. For a moment, Hale wasn't in his penthouse anymore. He wasn't 38. He wasn't the dragon. He was 11 years old, hiding in a cabinet in a tiny apartment in Itaewon, holding his breath while his mother screamed in the next room. The memory hit him like a physical blow, sharp, precise, unforgiving. His father had disappeared 3 months earlier, swallowed by gambling debts, and the kind of men who collected payment in blood. His mother had taken 2 jobs, then 3, trying to keep them afloat. But debt had a way of finding you in Seoul shadows, and that night it found her. Hale remembered the sound of the door splintering. his mother shouting at him to hide, her voice high and terrified in a way he'd never heard before. He'd squeezed into the kitchen cabinet, his small body folded between pots and rice cookers, watching through the crack as 3 men entered their apartment. "Where's the money, Mrs. Crowe?" "I don't have it." "Please. I have a son." The first blow had made her stumble. The second put her on the floor. Hale had watched, frozen, his child's mind screaming at him to move, to do something, to be brave. But fear had roots, and they'd grown through him like poison vines, holding him paralyzed while his mother's pleas turned to sobs. "Please. You're just a boy. Please don't." He'd memorized their faces through that cabinet crack. Every detail, the scar on the leader's neck, the way the second one laughed, the indifference in the third one's eyes as he searched their tiny home, destroying everything they owned. When they finally left, his mother had lain on the floor for a long time, breathing in shallow gasps. Hale had crawled out of his hiding place, his legs numb, his hands shaking. "Mama." She turned her head toward him, one eye already swelling shut. Blood trickled from her lip. But she'd smiled. God help him, she'd smiled and reached for his hand. "It's okay, baby. It's over now." But it wasn't over. It was never over. The debt collectors came back. Then the loan sharks. Then worse. His mother worked herself to exhaustion, and still it wasn't enough. She died 2 years later, officially from pneumonia, but Hale knew the truth. Fear had killed her. Helplessness had killed her. The world's indifference had killed her. And he'd done nothing. That night, standing over her grave with rain soaking through his cheap funeral clothes, 13-year-old Hale Crowe had made a promise. Never again. Never again would he be the boy in the cabinet, too terrified to move. Never again would he watch someone suffer because he was too weak to stop it. He'd kept that promise by becoming exactly what he'd feared, powerful enough that no one could hurt him, ruthless enough that no one would try. But he'd forgotten the second half, the part about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Hale's eyes refocused on his phone, on Evie's message still glowing on the screen. "I am scared." 27 years too late, the boy in the cabinet finally answered. "Where are you?" The address came through immediately. 47 Dongmyong-aro, Mapo-gu. A residential neighborhood, middle class, unremarkable. The kind of place where families lived quiet lives behind curtained windows, believing themselves safe from the darkness that moved through Seoul's veins. Hale was already moving. He grabbed his keys from the desk, his body operating on instinct older than thought. Behind him, his office door opened. "Boss." His lieutenant, Min Jun, stood in the doorway with a tablet. "The Busan call is in 8 minutes. They're waiting." "Cancel it." "What?" "Boss, this is the Russian deal. 6 months of negotiation." "I said cancel it." Hale's voice was ice, final and absolute. He strode past Min Jun without slowing. "Where are you going?" Min Jun followed him to the private elevator, confusion cracking his usually impassive face. "We have the security briefing at midnight, and the shipment manifest needs your signature before." The elevator doors opened. Hale stepped inside. "Crowe, talk to me. What's happening?" For a moment, Hale almost told him, almost explained that somewhere in Mapo-gu, a 6-year-old girl was hiding in a closet, watching her world end the way his had. But the words wouldn't come. There was no time for words. "Handle it," he said as the doors closed on Min Jun's bewildered expression. The elevator descended 53 floors in 45 seconds. Too slow. Everything was too slow. Hale's heart hammered against his ribs, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. When had he last felt his pulse? When had anything mattered enough to make his blood move faster? His Maserati waited in the private garage, black and sleek and built for speed. He threw himself into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a predator's growl. The GPS glowed, 4.2 kilometers, 7 minutes in normal traffic. Hale made a challenge. The car screamed out of the garage and onto the street. Midnight Seoul blurred past, neon signs, late-night restaurants, couples walking home from bars, all of it meaningless background noise. He wove between taxis and delivery trucks, the speedometer climbing past legal and into reckless. A red light at the Seoul intersection. He ran it. His phone buzzed in a cup holder. He grabbed it at the next straightaway. I hear footsteps. Please hurry. The words punched through him. Hale's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The Maserati responded like a living thing. Engine howling, the cityscape becoming streaks of light and shadow. 3 minutes. The GPS recalculated. 2.1 kilometers. Another message. He's looking for me. Hale's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. In his mind, he saw the cabinet in Itaewon, felt the paralyzing terror of being small and helpless while violence happened just beyond the door. Not this time. Not again. The GPS chimed. 800 meters. Another buzz. He glanced down at the screen, and his blood turned to winter. He found me. Hale's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The car surged forward, crossing the final distance in seconds that felt like hours. He slammed the brakes in front of number 47, a modest two-story house with darkened windows. Silent. Too silent. He was out of the car before the engine stopped, moving toward the front door with the fluid precision of a man who'd kicked down hundreds before. Tonight, he wasn't the dragon of Seoul's underworld. Tonight, he was vengeance with a pulse. The house looked ordinary. A small front yard with children's toys scattered in the grass. A pink bicycle, a deflated soccer ball, a chalk hopscotch grid fading on the driveway. The kind of home where morning meant cereal and cartoons, where the biggest crisis was a lost backpack or a scraped knee. But Hale knew what violence looked like when it hid behind normalcy. He approached the front door, his footsteps silent despite his speed. Years of moving through dangerous spaces had taught him how to make his body disappear into shadow. The door was closed, but not locked. The handle turned easily under his grip. Amateur. Whoever was inside hadn't even secured his exit. The entryway was dark. Hale's eyes adjusted quickly, cataloging details with the clinical precision of a predator assessing territory. Family photos on the wall. A woman with kind eyes and auburn hair, the little girl with lighter hair and a gap-toothed smile. A shoe rack with tiny sneakers next to adult-sized boots that didn't match. Recent addition. The intruders. From somewhere deeper in the house came a sound. Low, male, angry. Words Hale couldn't make out, but whose tone he recognized. The verbal prelude to violence. The way men talked when they decided someone was less than human. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, the screen's glow illuminating his face in the darkness. He found me. The message was followed immediately by another. Closet upstairs. Then nothing. Hale's jaw tightened. His mind split into two tracks, the strategic and the visceral. Strategy said assess the situation, count the threats, plan the approach. But visceral said move now, because every second that child spent terrified was a second too long. He moved through the living room, glass crunching softly under his shoes. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. A coffee table overturned. Signs of struggle, recent and violent. A woman's jacket torn and discarded near the couch. The voice came again from what sounded like the kitchen, clearer now. Think you could just leave? Think you can take her in? A crash. Something heavy hitting something breakable. Then a woman's voice, weak and defiant. She's not yours. You have no right. The sound of impact. A body hitting a wall. Hale's hand curled into a fist. He reached the kitchen doorway and paused, taking in the scene with the cold efficiency that had made him legendary. A man, mid-30s, heavy build, standing over a woman crumpled against the cabinets. Laura Collins, presumably. Blood trickled from her temple. Her breathing was labored, one arm wrapped protectively around her ribs. The man hadn't noticed Hale yet. He was too focused on his prey, too drunk on the power that came from hurting someone smaller. Upstairs, Hale knew, a 6-year-old girl was pressed into the back of a closet, her phone clutched in shaking hands, waiting for a stranger who might not come. But he had come. Hale stepped into the kitchen, his shadow falling across the fluorescent-lit linoleum. "You're finished," he said quietly. The man spun around, eyes wide with surprise that would very shortly become something else. Terror. The man was bigger than Hale by at least 20 kilograms, all of it muscle gone soft from too much beer and entitlement. His face was flushed, veins visible at his temples, knuckles already bruised from the damage he'd inflicted. He looked at Hale the way predators do when interrupted mid-kill, confused, then annoyed, then aggressive. "Who the hell are you?" Hale didn't answer. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, his suit still immaculate despite the drive. His eyes swept over the scene once more. Laura Collins struggling to breathe, the broken glass, the blood on the wall where her head had connected. "I asked you a question." The man took a step forward, puffing up his chest. "This is family business. Get out before. Do you know what respect is?" Hale's voice was conversational, almost gentle. It was the tone he used before people disappeared. The man blinked. "What? Respect? You seem like someone who demands it. Someone who uses that word often, probably when you're explaining why someone should fear you." Hale tilted his head slightly. "I'm curious if you actually understand what it means. Listen, I don't know who you think you are. Respect," Hale continued as if the man hadn't spoken, "comes from the Latin respectus. To look back at, to regard, to see someone as worthy of consideration." He took a single step forward. "It's earned through strength, yes, but not the kind you practice." The man's hand moved to his belt. Hale saw the knife handle there, worn and familiar. A tool he'd used before. "The kind of man who beats a woman," Hale said, his voice dropping to something colder, "who terrorizes a child, who breaks into someone's home and calls it family business. That man understands nothing about respect. He understands only power. And he confuses the two because he's never encountered someone truly powerful. You're really starting to piss me off." The man pulled the knife, a 6-inch blade that caught the fluorescent light. "Last chance. Walk away." Hale looked at the knife, then back at the man's face. Something in his expression made the man hesitate. "That little girl upstairs," Hale said quietly, sent a text message to a wrong number. "She's 6 years old. She doesn't know that the man who received it has killed more people than you've met in your lifetime. She doesn't know that he could buy this entire neighborhood with what's in his pocket. She just knows she's terrified." The man's grip on the knife tightened. "And that," Hale said, "is the only reason you're still breathing." Then he moved. 20 years of violence compressed into 3 seconds. Hale's hand shot out, trapped the man's wrist, twisted. The knife clattered to the floor. A strike to the solar plexus. The man doubled over, gasping. Hale's knee came up, connected with his face. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. The man crumpled like discarded paper. Hale stood over him, breathing steady, suit barely wrinkled. Behind him, Laura Collins stared in shock. "Stay down," Hale said to the groaning figure at his feet. "Or I'll teach you what respect actually looks like." Then he looked toward the ceiling, toward the closet upstairs, toward Evie. The stairs creaked under Hale's weight, each step deliberate and slow. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. Didn't want his footsteps to sound like the ones she'd been hiding from. The upstairs hallway was narrow, lined with more family photos. Evie at various ages, a newborn, a toddler, blowing out birthday candles. A life documented in frames, innocent and bright, until tonight shattered it. 3 doors. 2 open, 1 closed. The closed one had to be hers. Hale stopped in front of it, suddenly uncertain in a way he hadn't been in decades. He'd negotiated with warlords, stared down assassins, given orders that toppled governments. But standing outside a child's bedroom, he felt utterly out of his depth. He knocked softly. "Evie, it's the person you texted." Silence. "The bad man is gone. Your mom is safe. You can come out now." More silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Promise?" The word hit him like a blade between the ribs. Promise. The thing he'd failed to keep 27 years ago in a cabinet in Itaewon. "I promise," he said, and meant it with every cell in his body. The closet door opened a crack. One eye appeared in the gap, wide and red-rimmed from crying. She studied him for a long moment, this stranger in an expensive suit with blood on his knuckles. "You came," she whispered. "I came." The door opened wider. Evie Carter was exactly as he'd imagined. Small, fragile, drowning in unicorn pajamas that were 2 sizes too big. Her light hair stuck up in every direction. Her hands clutched a phone with a cracked screen like it was a lifeline. Then she looked down at herself and gasped. There was blood on her pajama sleeve. Not much, but enough. Splatter from when she tried to help her mother before running to hide. "It's okay," Hale said quickly, crouching down to her level. "It's not yours. You're not hurt." Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. "I was so scared. I heard Mama screaming, and I didn't know what to do, and I tried to text Uncle James, but the numbers got mixed up, and you did exactly right." Hale's voice was gentle, a tone he didn't know he still possessed. "You were so brave. You asked for help. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. Is Mama okay?" "She needs a doctor, but yes. She's going to be okay." Evie wiped her nose on her unicorn sleeve. "Are you a policeman?" For a moment, Hale almost laughed. Him, a policeman. The irony was crushing. "No, I'm just someone who helps people." She studied him with the brutal honesty only children possess. "You look scary." "I am scary, but not to you." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she took a tentative step forward. Then another. Then she was standing in front of him, this tiny human who'd accidentally texted a monster and found something else instead. "Thank you for coming," she said solemnly. "I didn't think anyone would." Hale felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd cemented shut after his mother's funeral. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand on her small shoulder. "Someone always should have," he said quietly. And finally, he'd kept his promise. Hale made 3 phone calls before the police arrived. The first was to Dr. Yoon, his personal physician, a woman who'd patched up bullet wounds at 3 in the morning and knew better than to ask questions. Mapo Gu, a woman, mid-30s, head trauma, and possible broken ribs. "Bring your team. Discreet. I'll be there in 12 minutes. The second call was to his attorney. "I need a trust fund established. Beneficiary is a minor, Evie Carter, age 6. Education, medical, housing, everything. Make it untraceable to me. Use the Vancouver Shell Company. Amount." Hale looked at Evie, who sat on the couch next to her mother, holding Laura's hand like she might disappear. Enough that she never has to be afraid again. "Start with 5 million USD. A pause. "Boss, Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, sir. I'll have it done by morning." The third call was the hardest. He dialed 119, gave the address, reported a domestic assault. The operator asked his name. "I'm just a neighbor," he said, and hung up. By the time Dr. Yoon arrived with her team, Hale had already secured the scene. The intruder, Laura's ex-boyfriend, he'd learned, was zip-tied and unconscious in the kitchen. Hale had dragged him there like garbage, away from Evie's line of sight. Dr. Yoon worked quickly, professionally. Laura's injuries looked worse than they were. A concussion, 2 cracked ribs, various contusions. Painful but survivable. She'd insisted on staying conscious, her eyes never leaving Evie. "Thank you," she whispered to Hale while Dr. Yoon wrapped her ribs. "I don't know who you are, but you don't need to know." Hale kept his voice low. "When the police come, tell them a neighbor intervened. Don't mention my name. Don't describe me." Laura studied him with those kind eyes he'd seen in the photos. "Why are you helping us?" "Because 27 years ago, no one helped me. Because I've spent my life becoming exactly what I hated, and tonight, for once, I got to be something else." "Because your daughter asked," he said simply. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Hale moved toward the door. "Wait." Evie's small voice stopped him. She stood up, still clutching her cracked phone. "Will I see you again?" Hale looked at her, this child who'd accidentally reached into the darkness and pulled out something resembling light. He should say no, should disappear like he always did, leaving no trace, no connection, no vulnerability. Maybe, he heard himself say instead. She smiled then, small but genuine. Okay. Thank you, mister. Just call me a friend. The sirens were on the street now, blue and red lights painting the walls. Hale slipped out the back door before the officers entered, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there. But as he drove back toward Gangnam, his hands steady on the wheel, his heartbeat finally slowing, Hale Crowe realized something profound. For the first time in 27 years, he didn't feel dead inside. He felt awake, and that terrified him almost as much as it freed him. Tomorrow, he'd return to being the dragon. Tonight, he'd been something better. Tonight, he'd been human. 6 months later, Hale Crowe sat in a hospital cafeteria eating overpriced coffee cake while a 6-year-old explained the complex social politics of first grade. And then Minji said that unicorns aren't real, but I told her that just because we can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right, Uncle Hale? Philosophically sound. Hale agreed, hiding his smile behind his coffee cup. Evie beamed at him, her legs swinging under the table, not quite reaching the floor. She wore a yellow dress today, her hair pulled back with butterfly clips. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes that night was gone, replaced with the unguarded brightness that children deserved. Unlehale. That's what she'd started calling him after the third visit, when he'd shown up at their new apartment, the one his trust fund had quietly secured in a safer neighborhood, with books and the stuffed dragon she'd mentioned wanting. You're like family now, Evie had declared with 6-year-old certainty. So you need a family name. He hadn't corrected her. Laura approached their table, her hospital volunteer badge clipping against her cardigan. She'd recovered physically, though Hale knew some scars went deeper than bone. She'd started therapy, started rebuilding, started believing that the world could be safe again. The trust fund helped. The anonymous inheritance from a distant relative that paid for Evie's private school, Laura's education, their new life. Laura suspected, of course. She wasn't naive, but she'd also learned that some gifts came without strings, and some strangers meant their kindness. Ready? Laura asked. Visiting hours start in 10 minutes. They walked together to the pediatric ward, where Hale had been coming every Saturday for the past 4 months. What had started as a single donation, a new MRI machine, anonymously funded, had evolved into something else. Now he read to the children. Stories about dragons who learned to be gentle, about monsters who chose to be heroes, about broken things that could be made whole. The kids didn't know he was the dragon of Seoul. They just knew he did different voices for different characters and always remembered their names. Mr. Hale. A chorus of small voices greeted him as he entered the ward. Children in various states of illness and recovery, their faces lighting up at his arrival. He settled into the reading chair, Evie climbing into his lap like she belonged there. Other children gathered around, dragging their 4 poles, clutching stuffed animals, seeking the comfort of story. Hale opened the book, something about a beast and beauty and redemption, and began to read. His empire still existed. The dragons still ruled Seoul's underworld with calculated precision. But now, between the business deals and the violence and the necessary evils, there were Saturdays. There were coffee cakes and butterfly clips and children who believed he was good. Minjun had asked him once, 3 months in, "Boss, what changed?" Hale had looked at the photo on his phone. Evie's latest drawing, a crayon masterpiece of a girl holding hands with a dragon under a rainbow. I remembered who I was supposed to protect, he'd answered. Now, with Evie's small weight warm against his chest and a room full of children hanging on his every word, Hale Crowe understood the truth he'd been running from for 27 years. Strength wasn't about building walls. It was about knowing when to tear them down. Power wasn't about instilling fear. It was about creating safety. And redemption wasn't something you earned through grand gestures. It was something you chose over and over in small moments that added up to a different life. Unlehale. Evie whispered, "You're smiling." He was. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened naturally. "Just happy to be here," he said. And he meant it. The dragon of Seoul had finally learned to breathe fire for the right reasons. not to destroy, but to light the way home for those still lost in the dark.